It's the end of the month, and so it's time for another Incus release. This time around, we're going to be looking at Incus 6.19. Stefan Greber, I'm the project leader for Linux containers and one of the maintainers of Incus, and this is going to be the video review of Incus 6.19. So, as the announcement says, this was not our busiest release. That's mostly because between 6.18 and 6.19, we released Incus OS, which ended up taking a fair amount of our time to just like smooth a bunch of rough edges, add some more features, really kind of tweak things as we were getting a lot of feedback about it. That's not to say that Incus 6.19 is a boring release, far from it. We've got quite a few exciting things in there, but it's not as busy as we've seen in the past. All right, so what's new in there? One of the highlight features is our initial support for SELinux. So that's been kind of a long time coming. LXD and then Incus have pretty comprehensive AppArmor support, and also support integrating with seccomp and some other systems. SELinux is what's being used now by most Linux distributions, and so it makes a lot of sense to try and improve our support. It works very differently from the way AppArmor works and can be a bit awkward at times when dealing with containers and virtual machines specifically. So it's going to be a little while before we've got like full support and we're very happy with it. But this release effectively puts in all of the infrastructure needed for us to expand on our SELinux support in the future. And yeah, basically what it does in this release is pretty simple, which is just handling the runtime context only for containers and effectively using randomized categories for that. That's all it does, but it does detect the different type of SELinux policies that are there and makes it easy to effectively expand that support within the Incus codebase in the future. The other pretty exciting thing is improved support for installing our agent on Windows VMs. You might remember, if you've seen that video for the intro release of the agent on Windows, getting it running kind of involved starting a terminal as administrator, going in the right folder, and then manually running the Incus agent binary and keeping that terminal running. That worked fine, but obviously not a very smooth solution. Now with Incus 6.19, we have something that basically lines up with what we have on both Linux and macOS, where you can run an install script that copies effectively some other scripts that act as a service on the system. And then on every startup, that service makes sure to run the latest version of the agent with the right configs. And that all happens in the background. You don't really see it. The other advantage of this being done correctly now on Windows means that the Incus agent CD-ROM drive will just effectively disappear, because on every startup, the loader will go and get the files it needs from the CD-ROM drive and then eject it so that it doesn't stick around. Next, we've got a feature that came out of Incus OS effectively, where we have a reasonably comprehensive resources API in Incus to query a lot of details about the hardware of the machine Incus is running on. That includes listing PCI devices, USB devices, GPUs, disks, network cards, all that kind of stuff. One thing we did not have included was the list of serial devices. And that's particularly relevant for folks running things like IoT containers, where you might want to pass in things like effectively radios, so radios to access Zigbee or Z-Wave networks. And those show up usually as USB serial devices, so either TTY USB or TTY ACM is the most common. But you have to figure out a stable ID on the host system, especially if you've got multiple ones of those, to then be able to pass that safely to containers. So prior to us adding this, it was a bit of guesswork to try and get the right thing past the right container. Now, with that extra bit of feature, it's possible to actually query the list of serial devices here and get the stable IDs, like either the ID or the path, which should remain constant. Next up, we've got support for bandwidth limits on OVN NICs. So that works about the way you would expect. Basically, just like on bridged network interfaces, it's now possible to set an ingress, egress, and priority for traffic, and that then turns into OVN quality of service rules. There's just one catch, which is that currently you need to restart the instance for those to get applied, whereas for bridged instances, it's done completely live. Then we've got some improvements to the CLI. We've noticed that a lot of our delete commands only supported deleting a single object, whereas some others didn't. So for example, like Incus delete could delete multiple things, Incus image delete could delete multiple things, but an Incus image alias delete could only delete a single alias. So did a bit of cleanup there to make things more consistent. So basically any command that only normally takes one argument for just the one thing they need to delete, now they can take multiple and it's deleted one after the other. Another thing related to VMs, so for PCI pass-through, we've had some issues with specific pieces of hardware where passing through the ROM section, so the firmware section, over to the guest could cause some issues. So there's now a config key called firmware that can be set to false. And if you do, then the VM will not get to see the firmware of the passed PCI device, but only the device itself. Then another one that's kind of related to Incus OS, which is if you want to access the Incus UI and you've not set up OpenID Connect, you'll need to access it through a client certificate. And to import that into a web browser, you need your client certificates to be in PFX or effectively PKCS12 format. It's possible to do the conversion using OpenSSL, that's fine, but yeah, it's a bit of work and also not necessarily ideal on other platforms. So we've effectively fixed that by adding some extra logic to the get client certificate command in the CLI so that you can get a CRT file directly, or you can also ask for a PFX file, so PKCS12, and then can import that in your web browser directly. And lastly, a small change to our list output, where now the CSV formatter can be told not to convert any of the units and just return raw bytes as is present in some of the other outputs like JSON and YAML. And that's it for the features in this release. We also have a lot of bug fixes and small performance improvements to our tests. There's quite a bit, but for the features, that's basically it. So let's go and take a look at those now. All right, first thing is SELinux. So let me get to a VM that does that. So that's my Fedora was like Fedora 43, I think, which is running with that support. So I can go and look at the Incus unit. I'm running Incus 619, obviously on there. That's not packaged yet, but when it will, that should start working. You need to effectively put a systemd unit override to set the environment variable for it because the feature is opt-in. It's not something we're running everywhere just yet. And once that's set, starting Incus will make it effectively do use the new labels. So if we look at the process list and we add the column to see the SELinux labels, we can see one container here and then another container here. And if we look at the label for the inside of the container, we can see this thing. So that's the privileged container type logic, I think, in SELinux on Fedora. And then what we do is we generate a custom set of categories, which effectively means that even though the rest of the label is the same, those two containers can't access each other's processes or anything. So that's just kind of the basics we've done. The categories are effectively randomized. So if I restart, what's the second one? Second one is D13-1. So if I restart that container, it's going to come back up with a different set of categories. And they're effectively checked to not be the same as anything else on the system, just to avoid that issue. Each category can go to 1024, I think, as far as the values, or 1023. Using the combination of two of those categories, we effectively can go past any reasonable number of containers on a given system. So that's why we're doing it that way. Just a single category was not quite enough because you can easily run more than 1,000 containers on one machine. All right, so that's the SELinux support as it currently is. Next, let's look at Windows. So I did to go look at my Windows VM here. So I've got Windows 2025 data center running in a VM. And yeah, just need to log in. All right. And now if we go look at the Explorer, we can see here the Incus agent drive, and we can see the new files in there. So the install script and the agent, the service files here, and then the rest is what we already had. So I can go and run the install script in PowerShell. That will actually install what needs to be there on disk and then starts the agent. And when it does, you'll see that the CD-ROM drive is gone at this point and the agent is running. So if I go back over to Incus and I just do Incus info win 2025, we can see a bunch of stuff coming from the agent directly. So the operating system is reported by the agent. We can see the NICs being reported also by the agent, internal memory usage, and a bunch of other stuff is all coming directly from the agent. And you can also 2025 PowerShell. On the non-interactive seem to force that. And you can actually get a shell inside of Windows through the agent. And the way it's installed, it's an actual system service, so it will survive a reboot. You don't need to mess with the CD-ROM drive basically ever again. It will just run that way. I think if we go look at the task manager and the service list, wherever that is, let's see if we expand that. Services here. There should be a service in here called Incus Agents that we can see is running. All right, so that's the improved Windows support. It's still not perfect. Windows still has, we still need to access Windows over the network instead of over VSOC. There is now a VSOC driver in the Virtio Windows drivers, but there's no Go package yet to use that directly from the agent. And the bridge process they ship does not let us specify the ports that we need. So there's still a bit of a gap there. We're looking into it. Hopefully we can get the Windows agent to go over VSOC in the near future so that it works exactly the same as it does on Linux, and we don't need to mess with all of that network stuff anymore. Okay. Next up are the serial devices. Okay, so I need to get onto a system with that. Here. So this is a VM running on another machine that has a couple of USB serial devices. So if we go look on the machine by ID, by path, we can see some USB serial adapters being passed in. And now if we do Incus info resources, we can see that they get reported down here, making it nice and convenient to figure out what is what, and then using that path to use like a Unix character device and pass that over to a container. All right. Next up are the bandwidth limits on OVN. So I actually have that applied. My Fedora VM here is actually running on my home cluster, and so it's running on OVN. And if we do a network test, we can see that it's being forced down to exactly a gigabit per second right now. So we can go and tweak that and let's say, go down to 100 meg. As mentioned, you need a reboot currently for that to apply correctly. So I'm gonna go and do that. And when the VM comes back, we should be good to go with that limit applied. So I'll just watch it boot here. Okay. All right. That should be about booted at this point. Come on, login prompt. There we go. Okay, so we go back in that VM and we run iperf again. Here we go, 100 megs. So that's for the OVN limits applied to virtual machines. Well, network limits applied to OVN NICs, regardless of whether it's a virtual machine or a container. Next up, we've got support for all of the delete commands. I'm not going to really go through all of those, but the concept is pretty simple. Incus delete always had the syntax for deleting multiple instances at once, and now that's been effectively expanded to most commands. If you look at network delete, you get the same syntax. Project delete, same syntax again. And the same is true for basically any command that does not need multiple arguments for its delete operation. Next up, we've got the firmware config for PCI pass-through. I don't actually have any extra PCI devices I can use for demo on this machine. But if you did, it's really as simple as just setting firmware equals false as a config option on the PCI device, and that will just do the trick and disable that part of the pass-through. Then we've got the PKCS 12 generation. So what we've supported for a while is doing get client certificate, and that just gives us a text representation, like a PEM encoded version of the public certificate for this client. Now we support also writing it to a file, so I can just do that, and that gets me my file. And if I wanted to import that in my web browser, I can do clients.pfx and then do format pfx. That prompts for a password because PKCS12 in most cases requires a password. So you just pick whatever you want and you're going to be prompted to enter it again in your web browser. So just do it that way, and then can try and load it here. If I go into settings, I think it's actually loaded already, so I'm gonna need to clear that. But privacy, security, certificate stuff here. Yeah, I already have a certificate loaded, so I'd go ahead and delete that. Yep. And then can do import, home directory, client pfx, this one we just generated. Enter the password, and there you go. So that's how that works. And last thing to show is support for showing raw units in resources list. So if we go and show the name and we want the memory usage, like that. That's the clean table version, which shows it's in human readable values. Now, if we turn that to CSV, it still shows it as human readable values, so megabytes or gigabytes. And now if we pass raw, then it turns into a number of bytes instead. So that's effectively it. That just makes it a bit more convenient if you want something that can be parsed and multiplied and divided to process without having to figure out what the unit means and then using the right multiplier to get it to the right number of bytes. So that just makes it a bit simpler. And that's it for Incus 619. So as usual, this is going to be available in most distros over the coming days. Worth noting that it's technically a 619.1. There was one last minute fix that went into 619 that actually caused a regression. So we had to just do a 619.1 fixing that. It was released before the main 619 release announcement. So in theory, nobody really had time to package the broken 619.0. Anyways, that's it for Incus 619. If you've got any questions, feel free to leave them down below or go on the community forum. We've had quite a bit more activity on the forum over the past few weeks than usual, mostly because of the Incus OS release, but also because we've been trying to concentrate our very limited mailing list and IRC traffic to also go onto the forum. We effectively have not only the normal forum posts, but also live chat with a number of channels for both development and also general support and questions. So effectively trying to use that as really the community hub for everything Incus and other Linux containers projects. Anyways, thanks a lot for watching. Have fun with Incus 6.19, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.